For our first speaker, we have the pleasure of having our presence of Dr. Pierre Horna. Dr. Pierre Horna is a legal affairs officer at the Competition and Consumer Policies branch of the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development, close to 20 years. He has been responsible for the design, formulation, and implementation of technical assistance and capacity building programs on competition and consumer protection policies in the ASEAN, Balkan, CIS, and Latin American regions. Dr. Horna has actively assisted governments and policymakers around the world in the design and implementations of competition and consumer protection policies. With his extensive portfolios in supporting SMEs, especially in times of pandemic, it's our pleasure to have Dr. Horna to share his insights on e-commerce in the times of COVID-19 SMEs around the world. Dr. Horna, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Chin, for the presentation and the invitation also from Taylor University. It is my great pleasure to speak to you on this subject matter. For today's conference, I would like to share my screen. If I can do that, please let me know if you can see my screen.
Yes, we can see very well, Dr. Horna. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And for those that are watching us in this presentation, I would like to invite you to log in with your QR code. Perhaps I will ask some questions to the audience on this precise topic. Our disclaimer is that since I am a legal affairs officer of the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development, I am not representing in today's meeting neither the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development or UNCTAD nor its member states. So that is clear. I'm speaking at my personal capacity today. Of course, the way I see the work that has been done so far in terms of SMEs, I would also add here not only SMEs, but also MSMEs, that stands for micro, small, and medium enterprises around the world. This topic is very close to my heart. As you said, I joined UNCTAD in 2003 when we were discussing about the importance of interlinking competition policy and the World Trade Organization and international development. However, before 2003, around 1999, I was very much linked to e-commerce in terms of assisting developing countries in assembling their laws on e-commerce based on the model law on e-commerce that was just released at that time by the United Nations Conference, the United Nations Commission on International Trade Law, or UNCTAD, which are based in Vienna, Austria. So e-commerce is very much close to my heart since the end of the 90s, after 4 years of having internet available in some developing countries like 1995, I've been following up this subject matter throughout the last 25 years. So I'm happy to talk about this now with linking on the issue of COVID-19, the pandemic, as well as the work of accessing and moving forward on the MSMEs subject matter that is of crucial importance in the post-pandemic world. Having said that, thank you for those that are already connected to this presentation through the QR code. This is, I will try to do it as interactive as possible. And I will also ask Xin if you can let me know 5 minutes in advance when I am about to finish my presentation, just to interrupt me, no problem at all. Thank you very much.
Okay, no problem.
So e-commerce in the context of COVID-19, we have seen how e-commerce has been evolving over time, but more remarkably in the last 2 years, where it has reconfigured the way sectors and markets work with a high potential for job creation, economic growth. And of course, we are discussing here about access to markets by MSMEs as well. There is a new mode of intra-regional trade that can serve and fill in the gap as an opportunity for regional groupings and regional international regional organizations that might not be dealing so well in terms of promoting intra-regional trade in developing countries and in developing and emerging nations. So you see that e-commerce has been seen as more than an opportunity to solve the problem of the pandemic as a whole. And if you look at this, you can already see, for example, how some of the challenges that MSMEs have been facing developing countries and emerging nations have actually been addressed by SMEs, by e-commerce. And in this regard, I would like to pose a quick question to the audience as a first question on what do you think would be the main challenges that MSMEs face in developing countries? And over the basis of your answers, maybe I can elaborate better on the e-commerce part, because if you talk about, you see, access to finance is what can I say? It's a traditional issue that has been always as a major point for SMEs in developing countries. And as a matter of fact, the way e-commerce has been instrumental in the area of access to finance has been remarkable in the last 2 years. But let's go to the second part, which is you mentioned here administrative red tapes. And in here, we are also discussing about how e-commerce can facilitate and simplify processes. But these administrative red tapes have been somehow also lessened in some ways because of the way e-commerce in one of the areas, which is e-government, have actually been developed not only during times of pandemic, well before. There's been a digital strategy by many countries around the world in terms of digitalizing their services between government and administrative agents, administrative users, and that is a part of the main area that e-commerce can also be facilitating in these types of challenges. You mentioned low entry barriers as well, because maybe you wanted to say about barriers to entry that will hamper the access of MSMEs in markets. And in here, we are discussing about access of MSMEs in digital markets and how MSMEs in this particular area can actually use e-commerce and use e-commerce platforms to access to global value chains in the economy. And that is a huge area of development that we have seen so far during the pandemic. When you talk about not having enough exposure, will also relate to precisely how MSMEs, without digitalizing their services, might also be impeded or hampered to access, as I said, not only to global value chains, to global markets, but also regional markets that are also important for neighboring indirect e-commerce transactions. The lack of women and youth participation is one of the huge areas that the United Nations are doing in terms of gender balance, and also to potentially strengthen and reinforce the role of women and youth in MSMEs, particularly in micro enterprises. And that is an area where we are working quite actively in the last years. There's also the issue of monopoly by certain major players, and that is clear, particularly in digital platforms. You see the digital tech giants that have been acquiring or have been providing very different areas of access to small startups, and they whenever they develop specific startups, they hostilely in a different way acquire the specific line of business by these big platforms. And you may see that these are only gatekeepers, but that is not the real truth. Gatekeepers would actually be just the facade of this particular behavior of these digital platforms. Here, for example, in this particular area, competition policy and antitrust laws would actually be an opportunity to discipline e-commerce markets in developing countries. And that is a huge area that we're also working in the UN. Highly competitive environment, yes, I would put it in a way that it's an area where in a highly specific markets where MSMEs are accessing, you need to be competitive. You need to have not only you need to face contestability of markets and facilitate some factors that will be able to keep yourself in the market, but also try to incorporate other factors in the case of your services or goods that you are producing, would be able to maintain a level of competitiveness that should be regarded as international competitiveness. E-commerce can provide this particular area as well if you do it in the right way. Low average income of consumers, the problem in developing countries and emerging nations is not only the problem of low average income of consumers or small purchasing power, but also lack of trust to e-commerce, and precisely because of the last point you mentioned on cybersecurity or cyber attacks that are hampering e-commerce markets in many countries, and you need to create enough trust to enhance consumers using even more. And in this area, UNCTAD laws as a model laws on e-commerce, digital signature, digital certificates, and everything that you have seen so far in the last probably 15 years or 10 years have been actually trying to enhance consumer trust to use these technologies in a better way and with more security. I see here more areas here, for example, e-commerce platforms with cheaper prices on the same product. We talked about the e-commerce platform, digital platforms, financial assistance related to access to finance and lack of manpower. Perhaps here in this area, I just would like to ascertain that the problem of absorptive capacity of MSMEs to deal with these technologies may actually deal with an overall and a structural problem of digital literacy. And that's where we're talking about virtual education that would actually access and address the problem of digital literacy that is a major problem in many developing countries as well. Okay, moving on, and thank you for your answers. We talked about now what you just mentioned, try to reorganize it in different areas. You have issues faced by SMEs in developing countries, lack of knowledge about buyers' preferences, lack of strategy and unique positioning, lack of knowledge of competition. Like it's very much in relation to what you said earlier. I'm just trying to put it in different organized way. Lack of communication, resources, and efforts, lack of online buyers, increased competition from suppliers, high cost of logistics, lack of addressing system in developing countries. So you see that there are major issues that MSMEs are facing in e-commerce markets, but those issues are basically some of the underlying and outstanding issues that e-commerce in itself can provide an opportunity. And if we move forward on the analysis, we can see that there are main trends emerging or being strongly accelerated by the COVID-19 crisis, which impact MSMEs. And one area, and that is a sort of like a public policy prioritization that many governments have actually undertaken in the last 2 years, is how to provide more access to digital infrastructure. And that is not an as easy an area, because it requires a lot of resources, public resources, that would actually be very important to undertake. The e-commerce in itself has actually been strengthened by the COVID-19 pandemic, and how e-commerce can actually be the only way sometimes when you are in a lockdown to digitalize and to go there and continue operating in the market. And that is also dealt with the issue of teleworking that has been very much clear and salient in the last 2 years. Having said that, I just would like to provide more questions to you about how SMEs can or may unlock growth in a post-COVID world. We have seen already some opportunities that that could be rising from this pandemic and post-pandemic, but we are trying to put forward areas in which services and goods that are putting out there can actually be enhanced and streamlined by e-commerce. You mentioned here digitalization. Yes, digitalization of SMEs services and that are put out there in the market can actually unlock growth in a post-COVID world, and indeed has happened. And if you look at the different areas, we're not discussing here only about commodities, for example, commodity markets. We are also discussing here services and even e-health services in the sort of the origins of the pandemic that are connected to health. They are connected to the health crisis that the pandemic prompted. And here you are looking into how e-health can actually, or has actually already addressed many of the issues that that consumers and patients were trying to address during the pandemic and beyond. So e-health can actually be a very important area. Innovation, it's linked to intellectual property, and it's linked to how intellectual property is being triggered in developing countries, and how intellectual property cannot conflict with other policies that are important in this particular matter, which is, for example, antitrust. So being innovative in this particular post-COVID world, it's extremely important, but it will need to be enhanced by own IP laws, that are promotion innovation, at the same time having a complementarity feature by antitrust laws in order not to create distortions in the market. For example, with the issue of the vaccines, when we talk about research and development, where pharmaceuticals are producing specific type of vaccine, and these vaccines are worldwide wanted by developing countries' governments, then you create a sort of like a dominant positions based on an IP right. And that is very important, not to be abusing this particular situation in the market. So being innovative, it's important for MSMEs, provided that you don't create a salient market dominance that would also hamper other competitors. The utilization of government grants, it's connected to state aid, and how these government grants would not be able to limit themselves to, or at least to be limited by the way state aid may create inefficiencies in the market, even in a post-COVID world. You need to make sure that this cyber support or government support would not lead to distortions of specific companies that are actually that are actually needing some help, and those that are not really needing help and support. Various platforms. Yes, I would also link it to what we discussed earlier in terms of digital platforms and digital gatekeepers, and we already talked about this. That would actually be very important to diversify the services and the goods that are being produced by MSMEs. Improving digital market strategies. I think this is critical. If you're going to work and stay in e-commerce, you would probably need to have more expertise on how to develop yourself in marketing and digital marketing strategy, in digital marketing itself. And in here, we also discuss how to promote not only digital market strategies, but also consumer-friendly digital market strategies that actually be very important for MSMEs as well. The way you see also the resources, and when you say double the resources and double the team, I think that it is, of course, always important to strengthen your work, your factors of production, but at the same time, see whether you may have enough resources to do so, either by providing this, what you said earlier, on government grants, on government support that are needed to be able to be at the level of this absorptive capacity that e-commerce markets may lead, but also at the same time to provide the resources and the services that you need for e-commerce platforms that are competitive enough to be in global value chains. I said earlier, we also talked about consumers. The consumer protection part of post-COVID-19 in e-commerce is of critical importance, because you see more and more practices and business practices that are harming consumers and consumer rights. The way we've worked in the UN in terms of consumers is to strengthen our UN guidelines on consumer protection that have been revised in 2015, in the last 7 years, and we are
Sorry,
working.
Dr. Horna, you have 5 minutes. Yes.
Okay, and so there are so many ideas that you can put here, and let me just, because of time, let me talk about what you said earlier and discuss, for example, the issue of access to cross-border dispute resolution. That will also be very important, for example, because in e-commerce, you are talking about a non-border or a cross-border activities. And because of that, you need to have an infrastructure, not only a legal but institutional framework that can deal with cross-border dispute resolution, because more and more e-commerce is borderless. And that is important for the purposes of how to adapt what you have in terms of legislation, in terms of frameworks that will able to have a strategic thinking, besides what you say here on design thinking for the frameworks or tools that are already available. Well, you have more ideas here, and I thank you for your participation. I just would like to finish by saying what we are doing in terms of, well, I have here some specific cases like Korea, that because of time, I won't be able to look into detail, but I just would like to talk about some of the areas that antitrust authorities have been dealing on how to respond to these challenges in terms of specific areas, you know, and we've talked about many topics, but now we are focusing on discipline markets, discipline digital markets. And here we are discussing redefining competition law enforcement within digital sphere. We also need to discuss about what are the trade-offs between consumer welfare, third-party platforms, barriers to entry and competition, as well as innovation. What will be the role of privacy? And that is linked to consumer protection, as we said earlier, but also how competition authorities are assessing the issue of privacy and data. And of course, how do you deal with the area of when you accumulate enough data? Will it be acting as barriers to entry, particularly by the digital platforms? And of course, the issue of merger and acquisitions in the digital world is also a specific type of challenges that we would like to discuss. And maybe I will be looking forward to your questions as well. So we talked about this in this area because the impact of COVID-19 on digitalization, on MSMEs and competition had actually deal with a number of topics that we just touched upon, particularly the issue of cartels and international cartels, because you don't know what's happening in digital world, and that would be more difficult to discover digitalization of cartels when two algorithms, computers are actually colluding against competitors worldwide. And that is an area where MSMEs are completely not ready to look at it, because even competition authorities are not ready to look at it from that perspective. We are working on that area, and I personally am researching on this area in the last 3 years. So, and to finalize, we talked about digital governance, and here we are working on this area about how to prepare and support competition policy in terms of what would be the areas of MSMEs policy that would be important to address. And in here, digital governance, we both talk about, and you mentioned monopolies, you talk about regulatory frameworks to address these issues, and what would be the area of redefining market definitions because of these precise challenges that digital markets pose. And here, I just would like to very briefly say about digital cartels, where we already talked about the importance of how algorithm decision making and AI related environment would actually be very difficult to enforce by competition authorities, and how would be the impact of digital cartels on MSMEs access to global value chains, as I mentioned earlier. We are working on different areas in the UN, and here I'm just promoting what we are doing, because we have guidelines for digital platforms providers and MSMEs, would create sort of like a self-regulation tool merging relevant policies that would actually lead with to try to link between both sides of the table, SMEs and large companies, as well as providing some areas of further development by countries in terms of saying what would be the best way to move forward. For example, by issuing voluntary code of conduct and best practice, so all platforms and digital platforms can help benefits and all actors, including SMEs. With that, I stop my presentation and I look forward to the questions. Thank you, Chinchin.
Thank you very much, Dr. Horna, for a very insightful presentation on this particular pertinent topic, especially for our SMEs post-COVID situation. So perhaps some of the audience here have some questions. We will take your question after the session, and it could be that I believe Dr. Horna will have to leave after this presentation. So if you have questions, please post it in the chat box, and we'll relay also any specific questions that you have to be addressed to Dr. Horna to be addressed later, even if he can't join us later on, no problem. Okay, so thank you for the participants, also assistants in giving your input in the mentee discussions, which is very lively earlier on. Thank you. So let's invite our next speaker, Mr. Izwan Zakaria. He's actually very familiar to some of us. And Mr. Izwan Zakaria is the managing partner of Izwan and Partners, which is a corporate law firm helping technology companies and startups to do business and raise capital in Malaysia. Mr. Izwan focuses on advising startups and technology companies with an emphasis on advising fintech startups relating to regulatory matters involving the Central Bank of Malaysia and the Securities Commission. Mr. Izwan also has experience in advising startups and venture capital funds on matters ranging from compliance to funding agreements. He's deeply involved and active in the startup ecosystem, whether his mentor, actually he is a real mentor and founders at Founders Institute, which is the world's largest pre-seed startup accelerator, Malaysian Global Innovation and Creativity Center, and Singapore Center for Social Enterprise. Mr. Izwan Also being consulted by the World Bank on issues related to improving the startup funding ecosystem in developing countries. In 2019, Mr. Izwan was also named as one of the 30 people to watch in the business of law by the Asia Law Portal. Let us put our hands together and welcome Mr. Izwan to make his presentation on legal tips, legal aspects of e-commerce in Malaysia.
Dr. Sia, thank you very much for having me today. Happy to be here as always. Again, I don't know, for both Dr. Sia and Dr. Pierre, being legally trained, when somebody asks you, when it comes to legal matter, somebody that comes to you, what is important, it's very hard to tell you what is important because any lawyer will probably tell you everything is important. So I will do my best to hopefully the next 20 minutes to share in terms of from a Malaysian perspective, what are the things that you should be looking at if you're planning to sell things on the internet. And also perhaps even if you're on the other side of the spectrum where you are buying things on the internet, it's also good to know how does thing work from a legal perspective, and hopefully very much looking forward to the Q&A as well, getting to know all the participants today that have decided to be with us this evening. So thank you very much, Izwan. I run a small practice where we work exclusively with early stage companies, so we don't work with large company. Not that I don't like working with them, but as much as I enjoy working in large transaction, I realized that I actually love working with entrepreneurs and startup founders a lot more. So again, thank you so much to Putri for inviting us today to share some of the perspective of what we work. When we're talking about the laws, it's always something that a lot of layperson will always ask, like, why is it that there is no specific law that covers everything? And the answer to that is always a difficult one for anyone who is legally trained, because a lot of the time the laws that exist may have been enacted by the lawmaker. So in Malaysia, obviously, being a common law English tradition, the laws were made by the parliament. Then when they were enacted, obviously they had a particular purpose of why they were established. So there is no single law, that there's no e-commerce act, something, or e-commerce legislation out there. So in other words, what we have is essentially a mixture of different legislation, different regulations that were enforced for very specific reason, but by virtue of the law related to the e-commerce transaction, and therefore becomes pertinent and binding to the parties of the transaction. So obviously in the discussion today, the emphasis will be more towards the merchants or the sellers or the party that is offering goods or services on the internet, whether or not it's through an e-commerce platform, whether it's through other own independent platform, which will hopefully will go through the next few minutes. So very quickly, from this table, you can see that there are different years upon which the laws were being passed by the parliament, which is the legislature body in the country. So things like what Dr. Pierre highlighted earlier, Malaysia does recognize electronic contract. So there's no issue when you agree on terms and conditions. When you want to purchase product or goods on the internet, it is legally binding. Although in practice, we still see sometimes confusion in the scenario when you're signing online contract, where you're still wondering whether or not you actually need a witness, whether or not online signature is actually applicable. So the answer is yes, it is valid and possible. So we do have a consumer protection law, which protects consumers in general. But in 2012, the government recognizes that as e-commerce transactions are obviously on the year-on-year increase, the government came up a guideline through the Ministry of Domestic Trade and Cooperative. So we will go through the disclosure requirement shortly. These are mandatory rules that needs to be displayed if you are selling things online, which obviously we all do nowadays, as we are getting more accustomed to buying things online. And additionally, we also have the Sales of Goods Act, which obviously governs what happens when you buy things, whether or not it's offline or online. What happens if the things that you bought was not up to the standard or specification of what you had hoped it to be based on the representation that was made, and what are your remedies under the law. And obviously the last is obviously the guidelines. Obviously we have the Malaysian Communication Multimedia Commission, which is in charge of things that people do on the internet, to put it simply, and that also covers in terms of what are the things that considered to be obscene. So obviously the word obscene is not clearly defined, but obviously you can read decided case that obviously the Malaysia Kini case would be a good example for that, which we won't go to detail, but the point I'm trying to make here is that although we have all these laws, but we also have other sources of law. As you, a law student, will probably know, laws are not just made by lawmakers, by member of parliament or the senators in the Senate house, upper house, but also by the judges that make decision that will also be binding. So there are a lot of cases involving e-commerce disputes, increasingly over the years, because people are buying things online, and sometimes they buy large things. Like people can actually buy cars on e-commerce platform now. So there are more increasing large ticket items, and obviously the kind of disputes that we are also going to see are becoming more complex as well. So these are just some of the laws in this table, but obviously you have other laws that would indirectly or directly relevant. Again, we shared with you earlier that there are a lot of laws that may not apply depending on the business that you're operating. So obviously, if you're selling things on the internet, if you're doing direct sales, whether or not, if it's through online or offline, it will still be applicable to you, which means that you need to have the necessary license. And obviously, if you are running a business, and this is something that I think a lot of people that are selling things, especially on social media, they are selling stuff on Instagram, they're selling stuff on Facebook. So long as you are running a business, whether or not it's a small business, you are doing it on your own, the law here, the Registration of Business Act, actually requires you to register your business with the Companies Commission. It doesn't cost much to register. Sometimes the government actually encourages you to register. Sometimes even the fees even waive 60 ringgit, which is around $15 to register a business. Which obviously, if you are moonlighting or you got a full-time job, then there's a separate issue with the private arrangement that you have with the employer that may prohibit you to work. But the point I'm trying to make here is that if you're planning to sell things, it is a requirement for you to register as a business, even though it could be a sole proprietor or enterprise. So obviously, if you have a company set up, then you have company's law that will apply. If you're paying, if you're receiving payments through a QR code or using e-money or using other form of payment, even cryptocurrency, if you are open to receiving that kind of payment, although it's not recognized as legal tender, obviously there are laws that applies, which is in place as well. So obviously, the more money you make, you also have to pay income tax. The same law applies whether or not you're selling things online or through a brick and mortar business. And the last, obviously, something that the previous speaker, Dr. Pierre, has mentioned a lot, which is how merchants or even platforms are using personal data. Something that we will go through a bit more extensively in the next few minutes. So very quickly, there is this regulation that is to be read together with the consumer protection law, which is something that I think some people are aware. I think a lot of people are not aware, but it's actually a very important disclosure. So if you're selling things online, whether or not you're selling it through a e-commerce platform, which is through Shopee or Lazada or some other major e-commerce platform out there, obviously in this platform there are specific disclosure that will already be required anyway, already based on the terms of condition. But if you're selling things on your own through your own social media or through WhatsApp, even a lot of people selling things even through messages, when people sharing things online, there are actually laws in place that requires you to give this mandatory information. These are actually mandatory, so you need to explain clearly what is your business, especially your business registration number, which is why if you don't have a registration number, then you need to go and register as a business. You need to explain clearly what is the product that you're selling. It cannot be halfway through and then I think a lot of people know or have experienced a scenario where people post things online, and if you want to know more, you need to send a private message or you have to PM me kind of thing. So obviously, under the law, that is actually not permitted. So if you are planning to sell things, it is a requirement for you as a merchant or a seller to disclose as clearly as possible what is the product is selling, how exactly you're gonna receive, how you're going to receive payment, whether it's through cash on delivery, whether it's through online transfer, what are the other terms and conditions, or even payment, even in terms of delivery and shipping, in terms of how the product will be delivered and the time upon which the product will be sent to you. So I'm spending a bit of time explaining on this because I think it's something that is already enforceable, and it is binding, it is enforceable, and perhaps the regulator being inundated with so many e-commerce transaction disputes, and maybe the enforcement may be a bit lacking. But although the fine is quite huge, could be up 50,000 ringgit, and it can be compounded even more if the same offense is repeated. So if your company, can be 100,000 ringgit. So as an individual, there's also an imprisonment if this condition is not satisfied. So not trying to scare you here if you are already involved in the business selling things online, but these are the current requirements to give comfort and protecting the consumer, so that as a purchaser, as someone that was thinking whether or not to buy something that you're selling, at least the person is able to make an informed choice, that when they're paying for a particular product, they know whether the product is the money that they're paying is inclusive of delivery, or whether it's a separate cost, and so on. So from a consumer perspective, if you and me buying things online every day or every week, we probably would think that there are only 4 steps or 4 sequence that would take place when we're buying things online. So you go to your favorite e-commerce website, or your favorite website that you go to buy things online, or your favorite shop that you go to, and then you choose what you want, go to the shopping cart, make the online payment, whether or not you're paying through online transfer, which is quite instantaneous nowadays, and then you get an email saying that you made a payment, and also a shipping details, a tracking code, so that you know exactly when you're gonna get the payment. And this is where it gets a bit exciting. And for me as lawyer, as a legal practitioner, I don't know about some of you who are also legally trained, it looks quite straightforward to many people, but for us, if you are involved in dealing with contracts or online transaction, dealing with multiple parties, it looks a bit more like this. So it looks quite complicated, but obviously you see there are multiple overlaps on the background. A lot of things are actually happening, and these are all governed by contractual relationships. You have terms of use, the terms of sales between the merchant and the buyer. You have the terms of service on the e-commerce platform, with buying things online on an e-commerce marketplace, for example, which we all know the major ones are. And nowadays, even the logistics company have actually partnered up with the e-commerce marketplace to ensure that the product gets delivered. So it's no longer something that if you are selling things online, you really don't need to be worried about. And some of the merchants or sellers are not particularly happy because some of these e-commerce platforms don't actually let you choose what kind of shipping company that you can choose to deliver the product. And obviously, because there are multiple various logistics partners that the e-commerce platform may have onboarded, it may also mean that you have varying results in terms of the quality of service and so on. And obviously, on the last section on the right side, you also have payments. Depending on how you make the payment, whether or not you're using a credit card, you're using e-wallet sanctioned by the central bank, you're using debit card, you're using even cash. Some platforms actually accept cash. You actually need to go to their authorized outlet, whether one of the major cash and carry shops, and actually make payment there. So because of this different payment method, it also means that the merchant, if you're selling things online, it means that you get paid at a different timeline depending on when the payment is confirmed. So obviously, it looks more complex than what we actually saw earlier in the last slide. Don't get overwhelmed. But the thing what I'm trying to say here is that there are a lot of things happening on the background to ensure that the e-commerce transaction runs smoothly. And because of that, that's where we come in as lawyers to ensure that all the responsibilities are properly attributed. But obviously, in practice, because there could be overlapping responsibilities, we work a lot with e-commerce platform, and we help draft some of the seller agreements. And one of the challenges always been when ensuring that the transaction completes. As simple as how do we get the purchaser, if I bought something online and I actually got the product delivered today, how do I encourage? This is why people use incentive, like what the Silicon Valley would say. So if I click, I have received the product, I'll get additional token and coin and so on, just so that I can make more purchases, for example. The point we're trying to make here is that from a legal perspective, it is important because it sets out the responsibility upon which, when the legal ownership or the legal risk or the warranty, for example, if something gets lost in the shipping, which will be responsible for the loss of the missing parcel? Is it going to be the merchant? Is it going to be the logistic company, or the logistic company may have said to the platform that, oh, I actually our third party gig worker has actually sent the product to the buyer's house, but we actually took a photo, and these are the challenges that from a legal standpoint may overlap, because and it's going to be more challenging when it comes to deciding which party is at fault, to put it simply, when it comes to a transaction that doesn't go smoothly, for example. So, and obviously, because of all these reasons that we're seeing, obviously the pandemic has accelerated a lot of things, especially people that are not used to buying things online and all buying things online. I'm quite surprised to see my mother going through online shopping carts. I'm quite surprised to see like hundreds of stuff that is on the wish list, probably waiting for the next festivity so that she can make all this purchases from some. But obviously the government is also realizing, and obviously we're seeing a lot of mixed responses on the players. We're looking at Competition Commission, which is a regulator in Malaysia in charge of looking at any potential contraventions of competition laws. And obviously a lot of the e-commerce players are also contributed by the ability for the platform to leverage on people that are willing to be involved in the gig economy. And obviously we've seen from an e-commerce perspective, obviously a lot of the time we are looking at mostly on buying things online, but there are also services that are also being offered, like food delivery companies, parcel delivery, for example, don't have full-time employees, and as a result, a lot of them are quite in limbo when it comes to social security, and something that obviously United Nations and the Ministry of Human Resources are also working closely as well. And we see here some of the news report looking at how food delivery is charging 30% on the delivery charge without actually being involved in the cooking process. We're just charging in between as an intermediary. So obviously the Competition Commission is looking at this closely. Obviously the cases of scams and abuse, cybersecurity, like what Dr. Pierre highlighted earlier, is becoming more rampant. And the challenge obviously is to look into this issue more seriously, because a lot of the time, if you're buying things online, you don't really have a choice in terms of accepting the terms and conditions. And sometimes the terms and conditions changes very rapidly without you realizing, or even if you're realizing it, there's nothing much you can do, simply because if you want to continue to use the service, you really don't have a lot of alternatives in terms of any other platform that could probably offer you a better option. So on that note, in summary, obviously, whatever that people say about how e-commerce is creating a lot of issues in terms of people spending more on things, and obviously the regulator is also looking at this, excessive household spending. We've seen new solutions like buy now, pay later operators, allowing people to buy things on a 3 months installment or 6 months installments. People can just buy things and figure out about paying later, which is not necessarily a bad thing from a personal finance standpoint, so long as you exercise some form of financial discipline. Although it is something that the government is looking at in other jurisdictions as well, in Singapore, in the UK, also in other parts of the world, looking into regulating buy now pay later operators. But I think the summary here is that there are more and more legal issues that will continue to arise. So as a business owner selling things online, these are some of the issues that will be more pertinent and more prevalent perhaps in the near future. Obviously, consumer privacy, the European Union through the global data protection rules obviously is taking the leadership in terms of looking at technology companies, also e-commerce platform like Amazon, which is a large monopoly. I mean, you know, when you go to a website and then you go to the next one, you see the same advertisement following you. They're becoming more excessive in terms of data collection and becoming more targeted in terms of trying to sell things to you, which to a certain extent isn't necessarily a bad thing from a consumer perspective, that you're being nudged to purchase things, but also at the same time, it's getting a bit annoying and also actually an intrusion of your personal privacy when you don't really have an option in terms to stop it. And they are becoming more and more regulators are looking into this more seriously. Obviously, we have personal data protection law as well that needs to be significantly reviewed to ensure that we continue to stay ahead based on the way how technologies are also evolving. Obviously, Dr. Pierre highlighted earlier extensively about competition law issues and e-commerce. Is obviously one of the major big concern for competition law issues, particularly about large players, platforms. I don't even need to name them, but you probably know there are only a few players operating anyway, because it's such an extensive business that requires a lot of money for marketing to capture the market share. And as a small business owner, if you're running a small company trying to sell things online, most of the time you are at the mercy or peril of the major platform or marketplace that you decide to get yourself onboarded. And obviously, additionally, because of more people buying things online, we're seeing a lot more cybersecurity risks, particularly on payment fraud, people masquerading themselves as somebody who they are not. And we're seeing more criminals buying, abusing transactions through money laundering and so on. And we're seeing more data breaches. And obviously, our existing personal data laws needs to be looked into, like what we spoke earlier, because at the moment there is no specific law under the data protection that requires the data user to actually notify the regulator that the server has actually been hacked. And that is something that is seriously important part that probably the government needs to look into, which I'm sure they are looking at the moment. And the last, obviously, very important point, like what Dr. Pierre highlighted earlier, particularly when it comes to international parties' involvement. Things are becoming more borderless. People are buying things not just from Malaysian buyer, there are also buyers from outside Malaysia. So we're seeing more and more cross-border disputes. How do we resolve disputes? And if I order something on the internet from Singapore or from Thailand, I didn't get what I ordered after months. How do I get a refund? Where do I claim? Do I claim through the platform which I bought it, which is becoming more actively the case? You can see the evolution over the years where e-commerce platforms now, marketplaces are becoming more an arbiter to decide on disputes as opposed to going to consumer tribunal, because obviously consumer tribunals takes much longer time because of more cases that needs to be administered, and marketplaces are hiring more people to resolve this dispute. So we'll see more and more complex transaction as well. If we're looking at digital asset, cryptocurrency and so on, which obviously a bit more active in other parts of the world, but it's something that probably is going to become more relevant in the near future. So thank you very much for listening. I'm very looking forward to your discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Izwan, for sharing with us very important legislations, especially for some of our audience here who are more interested to know about the legal aspect, especially in the local players arena. So thank you very much. Any questions, participant? I saw that there are 2 questions. Later, we will present it to our speaker here. Thank you. So next, let's proceed with our last, of course, our only lady presenter here, Miss Shanta. Okay, and Miss Shanta Helena is a director of programs at UNGCMYB. She's also director at Shaping Asia Media Sendram Berhad, and she has managed custom business content for The Economist and Time magazine based out of Spain, Kenya, and Indonesia. She co-founded the platform ASEAN Business Leaders, which features interviews and other ASEAN business content. Ms. Shanta is an MBA graduate from Nottingham University, Malaysia, and obtained a BA degree in communication and media studies from the University of Utrecht in Netherlands. Please let us welcome Ms. Shanta to make her presentation on sustainability for SMEs, business opportunities on green consumer trends. The floor is yours, Ms. Shanta.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Chin, for the introduction. And thank you, everyone. It's a pleasure being here and being among such esteemed speakers. So my name is Shanta. I'm the Director of Programs at UN Global Compact Malaysia and Brunei Network. Before I'll deep dive into my presentation's content, let me give a quick background about what the UNGCMYB is. So we are the world's largest corporate sustainability initiative. So what that means is that we are working with our members and with a wide range of stakeholders to drive sustainability and adoption of the SDGs in the private sector. So I'm sure that most of you will be familiar with, with this color scheme and with these boxes, which represent the SDG or the Sustainable Development Goals. So within that, the UNGC actually has a principles-based approach on how businesses can create an impact on sustainability. So we do this through the principles of anti-corruption, labor, the environment, and then also, of course, human rights. Because this is the key areas where businesses can make a significant impact if they want to drive sustainability. So we do this through a range of programs that we are working on, both with our members, but also with our non-members, including the public, in order to really drive action and impact for sustainability adoption. We are doing work with the multinational corporations, with large companies, but increasingly we see an uptake of SMEs as well. Because you, as from an SME background, you may wonder like, oh, sustainability, that has nothing to do with me. Let the big corporations handle it. But actually, when we deep dive into it a bit, you will see how sustainability is also affecting SME business, and most importantly, how you can reap business benefits of sustainability. So what are some of the opportunities for SMEs? Maybe you have read in the news, now more and more you see all of these terms, ESG, sustainability, but what actually does it mean? So sustainability is something that increasingly investors, bankers, and consumers are looking into when they want to either purchase your products and services or they want to do business with you. So ESG, which is short for environment, social, and governance indicators, are becoming a key important role even for SMEs if you want to apply for funding, for example. It is becoming part of a risk analysis whether a bank is going to extend their loan to you. As well, some of the consumers that are increasingly interested if this product has been made sustainable. So in ESG, compliance is also affecting SMEs increasingly, especially if you are supplying to corporates. So for those SMEs in Malaysia that are part of value chains, as most of them are, actually your corporate buyer may also request ESG data from you. So you may wonder like, oh, how do I actually do this, And so keep those thoughts, I will address them later on. So how sustainability affects the supply chain is the following, and this is important for Malaysian business, where the Malaysian government has taken their carbon neutrality pledge by 2050 So what this means is that climate action and carbon neutrality is becoming important, not only by the government, but also for businesses, because even though 2050 may seem a long way down, but you will have to comply with some of these climate action regulations. And from the social sector, we are looking into mainly human and labor issues. So what does this mean is that from a legal perspective in the UK, in Germany, but also in Malaysia under the shared prosperity vision, there's some key social issues that are becoming important for business. So moving forward, sustainability, we call it as your license to operate. So before, whenever you are selling your products and services, you may just focus on what is the cheapest price and how can I get the best quality for that cheapest price. But increasingly, sustainability will become a central part of how you are positioning your products and services. So what are some of the consumer trends? And this may be some of your consumers as well. In the younger generations, like millennials and Gen Z increasingly, they are actually being touted as the conscious consumer generation. They are very focused on climate action. They're also willing, and this is interesting for those business owners, that they're willing to pay higher prices for sustainability products. So they are really driving the demand. And if taken from a business approach, sustainability can work for your business advantages and is a good opportunity to tap into. So sustainable value change for those SMEs that are part of larger value chains are also becoming more important, as briefly mentioned. So they represent sustainability products, especially consumer packaged goods, represent more than half of the total market growth. And strategies executives are also concerning sustainability essential when they are doing their planning. So that means that if you want to continue selling your products or services to corporates, if you position sustainability as some of your key values, that can work in your competitive advantage. So in summary, what are some of the sustainability opportunities for SMEs? They can increase their resilience because you are future-proofing your business. Future-proofing is because ESG is becoming of significant importance. And here in Malaysia, well, at the moment here it is raining, but there's been, floodings that's been happening, and climate change actions are actually affecting all of us. So even if you may think, oh, I'm just an SME, what is a change that what I can make? But if we collectively are taking action, then we can build not only a better community and better impact on the climate, but also resilient businesses. It will also improve financial performance. In what way? As I just explained to you, that more consumers are very favorable of sustainability products, and also from a financing point of view, that the banks are going to look at your ESG performance as part of their risk analysis. Then last but not least, it also increases trust with maybe your investors, with your consumers, and just your wider range of stakeholders, especially if your business is located in a community. So let me now deep dive into Access, which is actually going to be launched in May 2022. I'm giving you a bit of a preview here, and then also linking about how digital tools can help SMEs to start sustainability. Because you may wonder, like, okay, now I understand what's the importance of sustainability even for an SME, but where do you start? So currently UNGCMYB, in partnership with SME Corp, is working on an online ESG platform to help SMEs in order to become sustainable, which is known as Access. So this really has a performance-driven approach to sustainability, because let me tell you now, sustainability does not have to be expensive. Please take note of that. Whenever you think about sustainability, you may think, of course, first importance to you is how does it affect your triple bottom line. Sustainability can cost save. It's about becoming efficient in your energy consumption. It's about becoming efficient in your water consumption. It's about efficiency when you are adopting technology. So sustainability can help you to build a competitive and resilient SME. So upon launch, Access has a very systematic and step-by-step approach that we can guide SMEs to become sustainable. So it starts with an assessment framework, which is consisting of 8 ESG indicators, as you can see here on the right side of the screen, which is revolving water consumption, environmental management, ecosystems approach, carbon footprint, inclusivity, wages, anti-corruption policies, and climate action. So these are some of the key ESG indicators that any SME might want to have a look into, as most of the corporates will also look into this if you are part of their value chain. So we'll help you, according to this framework, to assess and to improve your ESG and sustainability performance. Then Access this is a fully digital tool currently under development. It is a one-stop platform and dashboard for any SME to not only assess, but also to improve and to learn how you can do those improvements and how you can do those developments in order to be qualified as a sustainable supplier or as a sustainable SME. And very, excited to be launching this as well next month. And Putri knows this very well. It is that we've been working in partnership with Taylor's University on an e-learning platform, which is 5 modules on how actually SMEs can start from the very basic level, no prior knowledge required on sustainability. How do you build the business case? How do you implement sustainability and ESG categories within your business? So with that, I've kept my presentation short and sweet, as I'm very mindful of the timing as well, but that does give us some more time to address any Q&A that you may have. And I'll post here my contact details, so do please feel free to reach out if you are interested to learn more. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Shanta, and thank you for your extra effort. In addition to what you have been working on the sustainability with our fellow colleagues in Taylor's University. All right, so let's proceed with our Q&A for today. If you are hearing the rain, of course, I think Shanta and I, we are living at the same area, so I think the rain is quite heavy. So if there is any interruption, I apologize for it. So perhaps I will start with the question towards Mr. Izwan. There was a question from one of the participants, Dr. Lee. Hi, if a service product package was signed and due to pandemic, the company has closed down and consumers were asked to continue the service in other outlets that may not be convenient to the consumer. My question is, under the Consumer Protection Act, can consumer discontinue the service and request a refund of the balance of the unused package? Thank you. So I believe this question, I would like perhaps to invite Mr. Izwan.
Yeah, Dr. Sia, thank you so much for raising the question from Mr. Lee. Mr. Lee, we need to really look, I know I don't want to sound lawyer again when I giving the answer, but obviously we really need to understand in detail about your situation. The Consumer Protection Act does offer protection when it comes to unfair contract. However, the dispute, there's a cap of 50,000 ringgit, depending on the nature of the goods as well. And the complaint needs to be made to a tribunal, tribunal of consumer claim. So based on what you described, if your question was whether or not you can discontinue the service, the answer obviously based on contract law, there is no contract that will allow you to be tied down without termination, without the ability to terminate. So what is not clear right now whether or not when the company that you had signed up to purchase the product last year has been closed down. So what is not clear whether or not there is a new contract that was signed with a new party. So can I ask you to have a separate chat so that we can speak more about how we can help you? But to answer your question, under the consumer protection, the focus of the legislation is more towards consumer buying products, and they end up not being as what they were represented, whether or not the product was not safe or whether the product that you purchased was completely different from what you had agreed to buy, whether or not there was a misleading or deception involved by the seller when you decided to purchase. So alternatively, you have the normal court process as a legal remedy. So again, right now, it's not clear whether or not the agreement that was signed initially with the previous company is still applicable. considering that what you mentioned here, that the company has since closed down. So when you were told that you need to continue your services in other outlets, then the likely scenario would be a new contract would have been entered with a new party, and that's where we need to look at that document more closely to see what are the legal recourse that you may have under the law. I don't know whether that answer is useful, Mr. Lee, but that is a preliminary feedback that we could give you. So please feel free to have a note, and we can have a separate chat in terms of how we could help you navigate this situation.
Thank you very much, Izwan, for that particular answer. I think, yeah, a separate and deeper discussion will be required to have a better understanding. So another question perhaps to be addressed to Ms. Shanta. So you're encouraging SMEs to be involved in promoting sustainability. How do you see what Malaysian companies are doing at the moment, and what do you foresee they can do in the future? Thank you.
Yeah, I foresee for the SMEs that there will be increased push, both from a compliance and regulatory side, but also at the moment is most coming from voluntarily side. So those SMEs that have actually adopted sustainability within their business are often very well positioned in order to take advantage of this. In what ways? Especially if they're exporting into the EU and into the US market, where the legislation is often already in place, they are able to capture those market trends. For those SMEs that are, so far they're having a wait and see approach, in the end, it will be quite difficult for them to be competitive, because the laws will catch up with you from first international markets, and surely it will come down to Malaysia as well, now that we've seen that the Malaysian government has taken its climate action pledge. So these are important things to look out for. So please don't let it just to be as a risk site, and transfer it into an opportunity.
Thank you for that question. And I understand that currently, as you already mentioned, some of the SMEs, they're just waiting and seeing. So what else can be done to help them or to encourage them to do it, in addition from the academic perspective and also from the view of UNGCMYB? Thank you.
So there's still a lot to be done, and especially for those who are not familiar with sustainability and ESG. It may sound all a little bit high level, and it can be a bit overwhelming. So that's why we are working with our partners, including SME Corp and Taylor's University, to see how can we use digital e-learning tools and other resources that are made available for you free of charge, that you can use to become sustainable. In addition to this, there are also incentives provided by the government under green tech financing schemes, which may be interesting as well for you to have a look at. And then there's other incentives as well provided by the government under this green tech financing scheme, including adoption and buying of other sustainability related services. So in that way, there's an ecosystem that is being built from multiple stakeholders. So do have a look out, or please contact us if you would like to get any further details.
Excellent. Thank you very much for both Ms. Shanta and also Mr. Izwan for answering the audience question. So let's proceed to the final part. Sophia, I will pass the floor to you. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you so much, Chin Chin, for moderating the session, as well as to all the panelists for sharing their insights and experiences with regards to SME as well as sustainability. So for my presentation, I'm just going to invite all participants from diverse background to submit their research or thoughts or publication to our law journal, which is the Journal of Center for Research in Law and Development in Asia. Short stands for CRELDA, where we welcome all research, either legal or interdisciplinary research, to be featured in our CRELDA journal. So we do have participants from business, law, and variety of backgrounds. So we look forward to have your contribution or even collaboration with any of our academics at Taylor's Law School. And that marks the end of today's presentation. So I thank you to all the participants who remain with us today. And I'm mindful, some of the participants are requesting for the presentation slides as well as the recording. I will request from the speaker to share their PowerPoint slides, and I'll share the recording on Monday to all the participants who have registered for this webinar. So that's all from me. Thank you so much to all the participants, and enjoy the rest of your weekend. Goodbye.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great weekend. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, it's my pleasure to have all of you here. Thank you.